Hello and welcome to this edition of The Print Softcover, where we launch some very interesting non-fiction books. Today we have with us Tarun Shukla, who is an aviation journalist with over 2 decades of experience. He has written down a book called Sky High, The Untold Story of IndiGo, and he's here to talk with us about the book. Welcome, Tarun.
Thank you.
Tarun, to start with, you have mentioned in the book that it took like years in the making. So can you elaborate on why it took years and, challenges? Usually when you decide to write a book, you want to complete it within a given time frame. So challenges because it took so much time. Can you start with that?
Sure. So, the book started, I think around 2012, and at that point of time I was in Mint. And my editor asked me to just called me inside his room and said, have you read Nuts? That's the book by Southwest, about Southwest Airlines. And I said no. And he said, why don't you go and read it and write a book on Indigo? I was like, okay. And he said 3 months off from tomorrow. So that's how the book started. I was covering aviation since 2007 at Mint, and I loved the beat. I enjoyed tracking it. It was extremely, it had various sides to it. It had foreign policy, it had human interest, it had passengers, so many interesting facets to it. So I went on leave and started sort of working on the book. The book, it took very long because there were a couple of reasons for it. I mean, first of all, when I started off, Indigo, as you know, as an airline, is not very open to, sort of public scrutiny. It's like a very closed airline and sort of, very professionally run, of course. But that creates a lot of challenge for a reporter, because even though you've been covering the airline for so many years, if you're trying to go very deep into the genesis of the airline, where did the capital come from, where did the idea come from, so on and so forth, nobody likes nosy journalists, right? They would rather be, better off just with, the usual daily routine kind of stories. So I faced a lot of challenges for the first 3 months, which became 6 months because I was giving access and so on and so forth. So I went around in concentric circles, talking to people who sort of were part of IndiGo, which was like the parent firm, which goes back many years before Indigo, and started meeting people. And, then sort of I started sending a set of questions to the Indigo senior management and their promoters, Mr. Rahul Bhatia, and so on and so forth. Finally, they started to sort of meet me, and they agreed to speak and things like that. And so we had many conversations over the course of next few years. But just about the time when the book was, it was supposed to be published, I got a fellowship offer, and I went to US and I had a great time working with the Wall Street Journal and writing again on aviation there as well. And so the book got delayed. And unfortunately, it's almost like it was like a jinx. Then I again wanted to sort of publish it around 2019 or so, and then COVID hit. So because the book is on aviation, and I think a lot of travelers and passengers would love to read it. It made no sense to sort of publish the book at that time. So finally, now when the traffic peaked, we are back to the pre-COVID levels in terms of daily passengers. It seemed like a good idea to sort of get this book out. So it took like almost like 2-3 labs to get the book out over the last 10-12 years. And so it's taken a lot out of you, and I've tried to be as honest as I can with the reader, and at the same time give all the inside details of how an airline became so big.
So what I found very interesting in the book is although it is about Indigo, you do get a sense of entire aviation industry. You have mentioned other airlines, which gives you a perspective of entire aviation, how that has come up in the book. But you also talked about how Indigo is extremely, sort of closed airline. So how did you manage to then reach out to everybody? What was your process like?
So like I said, first 6 months were like really hard because there was no access and nobody wanted to meet you. And the promoters are genuinely media shy. I mean, it's not like intentional, but I think, both Mr. Rahul Bhatia and Mr. Rakesh Gangwal, they are both, they've always been sort of very cagey about, speaking into the media and things like that, unless, like I've mentioned in some parts of the book, but it's absolutely necessary. Um, but I think so. The hard part was so what I started doing was I started going, like I said, in concentric circles of people who were part of Indigo going back in time, and then through them to other people and so on and so forth. Um, it reached a point where I had a lot of information about the airline and the genesis and the background and what was happening behind the scenes and so on and so forth. After around 6 months of all the information that I had collected, I sent them my, like usual journalist, you send questions to the airline. So I send those questions to all the information that I had collected over 6 months to the promoters and things like that. Um, and even then they wouldn't meet me. So it was actually a very funny episode where I used to stay in Defense Colony in Delhi at that time, and so what I did was I knew that Mr. Bhatia loved Italian, so even though the questions were very hard, and I am sure they didn't want to meet me looking at those questions, but so I did a little funny thing. I there was a restaurant called, I think it still is there, Capri, and I packed a lot of Italian food from there and landed up in Chhatarpur where he stays outside his house. And I said, "Sir, I've got Italian, and we should have a lunch." And it was a very funny episode. So I just he allowed me in very graciously, and that's how we sort of broke ice and Italian bread. And so then the conversation started, and he was very generous to have that Italian, because brought in by a journalist, and a nosy journalist who was asking all those questions and uh, you know um, wanted to know more, and a media shy promoter didn't want to sort of give in more information, or didn't want to sort of be in public eye. So that's how. And then I had a series of meetings over the next few years with Mr. Rakesh Gangwal, Mr. Rahul Bhatia, Aditya Ghosh, several other people. And I must have met like some 300 odd people over the course of this book. There were former airline promoters, there were politicians, there were lobbyists, there were businessmen, all sorts of people I could think of who would add some value, some perspective, bring out nuances to the Indigo story. And so that's how the book shaped up. And uh, uh, I think Mr. Gangwal himself was very difficult to crack because he doesn't meet anybody. Almost like you would rarely find his pictures also on sort of social media or even Getty Images. I think there are 3 or 4 such images, right? So and the discussions with both of them were fascinating. I mean, they are both of them. I mean, if you talk to Mr. Rakesh Gangwal, it's like a masterclass in aviation. You learn so much about aviation, and his way of thinking is so far ahead. And similarly, Mr. Bhatia has his own, sort of forte. He's very passionate, very into how his airline runs. I think perhaps one of those promoters I have seen who knows just about everything that is happening inside the airline without actually being in public eye or even going to office. I think I've mentioned some of those anecdotes about how smartly he sort of keeps an eye on if there's something going wrong or something going not as well inside the airline. Yeah, so that was like a slightly awkward way of how I ended up uh, getting some access after my 6 months of research.
Tarun, you have been a journalist for over 2 decades now. So during your research while writing this story, did you come across some fact that you were also surprised by, like, this is very interesting, something that fascinated you in this entire Indigo story?
Yeah. So I think the way I approached the book was basically that, like you mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation, I wanted it not just to tell the Indigo story, but also, what happened during those years of the early 2000s, the late 90s, and so on and so forth. How aviation has shaped up over the last sort of 20 years or so, and how sort of various airlines came and they sort of so many died. I mean, some such major airlines like Jet Airways and Kingfisher, I mean, they just sort of went away. So the idea was to basically look at and contrast with how Indigo operates versus how all these airlines operate. How did and as you know, as a sector, it's a heavily lobbied sector, and I think uh, you just cannot survive without lobbying, right? So that's another very interesting side to it. So that itself took a lot of effort to sort of cobble the whole thing. So what made the Indigo story very the most interesting, and what I really enjoyed about it was, I think, mostly how professional they were, um, how far ahead they looked at everything. Uh, a lot of Mr. Rakesh Gangwal's vision, for example, of you know uh, what could happen 5 years down the line if we do this. Why should we not do a certain thing right now? And it's amazing that in a profession and in an industry where the promoters and everybody loves to be in limelight, and as a journalist also you have this small advantage that any aviation story gets like so much of traction, right? Because everybody wants to read a aviation story. So they resisted changing the business model. They resisted changing the livery of the plane. They just did not tinker with what the business model was for the longest time, and they kept hectoring at their core principle, which was to uh, keep the costs low as much as possible, but continuously expand and keep on getting market share and things like that. And when you do that, and if the other airlines are not able to cope with that kind of expansion, with that kind of because when you are expanding, you are giving choices to the consumer to travel more often with a particular airline, and your cost is low. So the competition really gets nervous. I mean, unless they can reduce their cost and match up to Indigo. So I think Indigo gradually, and I think some of the anecdotes have, like I've mentioned, how, for example, nobody really sort of cared for them. Even Mr. Naresh Goyal, in one of the anecdotes, how, for example, he said, um, they're like a fly-by-night operator. They will go very soon. There's nothing like low-cost airline in India. I mean, former promoter of Jet Airways. Um, but they stood by their business model, their thought process, both Mr. Gangwal and Mr. Bhatia, and they did not waver. And I think lots of new things, for example, in the airline, which perhaps nobody would have done. Like I was fascinated how, for example, they would remove uh, a lot of airlines wouldn't care that the plane should be extremely neat and clean, but they were very clear that their planes should be very clean. They can't offer lots of freebies and sort of jazzy stuff like in-flight screens and all. But they were very clear they wanted absolutely clean planes. So I was very curious, what does it mean by clean planes, for example, right? Everybody. So I figured out there that even to clean planes, have to get chemicals which are approved by Airbus and Boeing, right? You cannot. So like, what could be so special? Every airline would be doing the same thing, right? So I went back into the engineering setup, and that's how I realized that it's not just so. On the face of it, you would say, "Oh, we clean our planes very often," and so on and so forth. But there's much more to it, right? There's much more engineering backup that takes place, so to sort of keep those planes clean, and the carpets which have to be removed at a particular time. So they focus on that, and they spend money where it is required. And yeah, so I think lots of fascinating stuff around the airline in terms of how it was different from the others, kept to its core, and so on and so forth.
Tarun, you mentioned that there was some jinx with the book for it to be delayed. And then you also, in this book, you mentioned about an Indigo Jinx. Can you tell us what that jinx is? And
The Indigo Jinx. Oh
yeah.
yes. Okay, right. I actually totally forgot. Which I was so sort of got focused on the book Jinx. I forgot about the Indigo Jinx. So the Indigo Jinx was basically, they have expanded so much. They are almost like 350, 60% of the market, 350 planes, doubling in size to 600 by the end of the decade. And it was very curious, sort of a coincidence that I noticed that every time that Indigo has brought in 100 planes into the system, one airline has tanked. Uh, in and It starts with, I think, Kingfisher. I think around that time Indigo had become 100 plane, and then I think then SpiceJet happened in 2014, almost died, but then Mr. Ajay Singh brought over the airline. And then I noticed another 100 airplanes came in, and then around 2019, it reached about 200 planes or so. And then we saw Jet Airways crash, went belly up. And finally, we saw Go First. When Indigo was like 350, 370, 300 kind of this thing. So it was rather unusual, a sort of a mix where every time Indigo brought in or touched that 100 point, 100 planes mark, somebody went belly up. And it was not because there was some sort of a voodoo happening, but basically it was that they were sticking to their core, continuously expanding, and because they were able to keep their costs low, and they had a by and once you reach a certain scale, as much as 350 odd planes, or actually anything after 100 onwards, and with so much of capacity and network depth, it starts hurting competitors big time. And if you notice, most of these other airlines did not have a Rahul Bhatia or a Rakesh Gangwal, right? In the sense that while Mr. Naresh Goyal was very focused on and understood the business very well, his costs were very high, and he had lots of legacy costs going back in time. Similarly, Mr. Malia, I have explained how, for example, um, uh, the contracts he signed, it was just amazing how he used to sign his contracts versus how, for example, Mr. Gangwal would sign the contract. Similarly, in case of Go First, Mr. Nusli Wadia and Jay Wadia, while they have very big businesses, otherwise, I think there was the professional CEOs that they brought in, they were always, leaving the airline very often. So, like the core competency wasn't there as much as Indigo had, and of course, Mr. Rakesh Gangwal was active till 2018 or so, and I think since the inception of the airline, so it really helped. And of course, Mr. Bhatia provided that extra focus and local know-how, and ensured that good quality people are there. And I think also Indigo pays well. I think they have really created millionaires. I don't think so any other airline, including Mr. Naresh Goyal or Mr. Malia or anybody else in the country, has created the kind of millionaires Indigo has created, especially the startup team that was there. I mean, some of them are like worth 1,000 crore, which perhaps nobody could have imagined. So yes, I think the jinx is there, but it is to the benefit of some and not to the benefit of some others.
Tarun, what do you make of the aviation market right now? I think in an interview with you, you have mentioned in the book, Mr. Bhatia, I think, said that, for India, 3 to 4 player market is a good market. While we may have those many players, but essentially in India, we have like 2 major players, majority of the market right now. What do you make of the market? Just do you think we will reach a stage where we'll have like strong 3, 4 players?
So I think if you notice the new minister who's taken up, Mr. Ram Mohan, I think Naidu. Yeah. So I think one of the very interesting statement that he gave after taking over was, "I will focus on getting the airfares down." I think to make that as your key objective itself will require you to tackle this problem, which is Indigo Air India, when you see it from a passenger point of view. Because when you have a two-player market, it works to the advantage of both Air India and Indigo. You can set the fares the way you want to. Indigo posted a record profit of $1 billion or 8,000 crore. I think even when Indigo was starting, they would have not thought that they will sort of at some point of time, they will actually post a $1 billion profit. Air India has its problems. They have not posted profits, but they are in a sort of a transition state, and sort of it's going to take some time, which is why I think they will have losses because they're investing in the fleet and so on and so forth. But for both the key players in the industry right now, it suits that these fares remain at the level they are right now. They're higher compared to what they were. And that will be the challenge for the new minister. And the biggest problem, and I tried to answer this question in the book also with talking to international experts, the problem is that when airlines reach certain scale, the way they have in India, and there are no third, fourth, fifth strong players, it is very difficult for those players to catch up. And which is why they will be at some point of time, either the government will have to intervene if it thinks it wants a more vibrant market, or it will have to come up with some policies to, for example, let's say bilaterals to Dubai open up, right? And there's Akasa, and perhaps the minister wants that there should be more airlines, so he gives out more airline licenses. And so when the bilaterals are open up, the minister says, no, I don't want to give these bilaterals only to Indigo and Air India, not based on their current heft, but I'll give it to the newcomers like Akasa or any other new airlines that come up, or even SpiceJet. SpiceJet also is in a very weak state, so it will need to sort of bring capital and sort of shore up its finances. But that is the only way out if the government thinks, because as you know, in the past, there's a committee which has given a sort of a report saying that there should be some sort of a control in airfares, upper cap and a lower cap. But in a free market, that will not be appreciated, and it will create problems. So the only other way out is to create more competition, give some sort of more help to the newcomers so that they can also stabilize. And US, for example, and China, which I mentioned in the book, have vibrant 4-5 airlines, many more airlines, very strong carriers. So something on those lines will really help, because ultimately, if you notice, last 2.5, 3 years, and as journalists, we end up checking those numbers every day, how many passengers are flying, how many flights are there. The number is stuck to 3,000, but the number of passengers flying every day has gone to 4.5 lakh. So what is happening is there are more passengers coming into the system, but the flights have remained almost to the pre-COVID level. So, and what does that mean? That airlines are able to charge more money for the from this passenger set, which is actually growing, right? So the profits will increase, but may not be a very good idea in long term, because if you see social media, it is full of complaints about high fares and how low-cost airlines are also charging very high fares.
True. Then coming back to Indigo, in the chapter on crew, also you have, like, throughout the book you have mentioned how cost saving is like at the core of Indigo, but in the chapter on crew you have given examples as well. Somebody who has proposed measures to cut cost is rewarded, others not. So do you think it's a little extreme? What do you make?
It was like, I found those examples, like in the normal course of reporting, you don't go so deep. You go deep, but a book gives you a chance to go very deep, right? So I think some of those examples came out to be rather, like you said, extreme in some cases. And I think the fact that profitability is so important shows in what kind of person is rewarded, right? So for example, somebody who's removing a certain a particular metal box from the plane and putting a leather box and multiplied by 2,000 flights a day, certain weight is saved and certain fuel is saved and so much profits. So then you get rewarded and recognized in various sort of town halls that Indigo's does. But I think that's the nature of the business, because as an airline, you're like 70-80% of your costs are not in your control. So what you cannot ask Airbus to go beyond a level to sell you a plane cheap, right? I mean, Indigo has done a fabulous job. I've tried to explain in the book how Mr. Gangwal went ahead and sort of bought those planes, and for every single paisa he fought very, very sort of diligently. But this whole I think the reward, the airline is rewarding those kind of initiatives only because it thinks that's the only way they can save some money. Like, for example, if they have removed huge manuals of Airbus and things like that from the plane, and then it saves them some fuel, it helps the airline. And if the airline makes more profit, it gives more dividends, and it also rewards its employees. I mean, I think if you notice over the last 3 months, we have seen globally all airlines, giving lavish 1.5 months, 3 months salaries as bonuses to their employees. I think in India only, if I'm not wrong, Indigo has done that, and so it's a whole cycle. You save costs by sometimes even very sort of means that are like really funny, but if it reflects in the end result, and it works for the benefit of the promoters, of the shareholders, and eventually the employees, why not? So that's how it is.
But what you have talked about in terms of crew training, and a lot of people saying that training sometimes was a bit extreme for them, is this a norm across the industry in aviation, or was this something Indigo specific?
Yeah, so I think that was very fascinating because the Indigo training, is I spoke. I think the crew training, is polishing crew who are coming. Not just, I mean, crew as a profession is no more limited to Delhi, Bombay, and so on and so forth. The crew members are coming from all over India, right? And the requirement is so high that sometimes you may get crew who are not as polished, so to say, in the sense like there would be some from small town, and how to behave with the passenger and all. It's difficult to sometimes train them. So I think what Indigo has devised is a very sort of a, like I put in the book, it's a sort of a military kind of a training, literally, for the crew members, and they are forced to like not deviate from that, because I think Indigo worries that the kind of batches that are coming to them, if everybody starts behaving in their own way with the passengers, it will create a lot of chaos. And on a 2,000 daily flights kind of a mode, it's very difficult to sort of course correct, or take so many tackle those complaints and things like that. So yeah, I think it's really rough, but the crew members who come out of it, they are also very smart. They go through the training, and then after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, a lot of them leave. So the attrition rate in Indigo has always been very high. Like sometimes it's 30%, and they all leave for Air India or Vistara or all the Middle Eastern airlines. So I think the crew members realize that you have to go through a very rough training, but the reward is that after that, you can sort of you can fly with all these international airlines, and I mean it's like a dream job for many of them, right? So they go through it with a little bit of sort of yeah.
Understood. That's it for today, Tarun. Thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed reading the book, and wish you all the
Thank you
best.
so much.